Thanks, Margaret. Numerous benefits are associated with continued participation in musical and scientific endeavors. However, membership of underrepresented social groups, societal norms, and value systems do create barriers to continued participation in these fields. Recent studies have turned towards identity research to investigate what factors contribute to the development of music and science identities in order to create and implement retention strategies. Such efforts have been primarily directed towards understanding the factors which are instrumental to the development of music and science identities, including engagement, interest, interpersonal relationships, and perceptions. Although music and science are commonly perceived as fundamentally different disciplines, Monk and Preston in 1999 acknowledged that music and science are similar in that they are both products of social construction and both consist of performative and production elements. Moreover, both can be associated with roles or positions within society. For instance, Krauss and Hargreaves in 2013 found that musical self-image is multidimensional with a practitioner and consumer element. And Niskanen et al. In 2018 referenced scientific identity as reflecting roles and responsibilities associated with holding a particular role, such as a biologist, chemist, or physicist. Musical and scientific identities are constructed through negotiated experiences and are impacted by engagement as well as interactions between the perception of self and others. I also want to highlight that Carlone and Johnson in 2007 developed a model of science identity that depicts three components: competence, performance, and recognition. Competence refers to having scientific knowledge and a motivation to understand the world through a scientific lens. Performance refers to the ability to apply and demonstrate scientific knowledge. And recognition refers to being recognized as, quote, a science person, both by the individual themselves and by other people. Speaking of perceptions of images and stereotypes, the prototype concept suggests that object perception is organized around a typical, average, or model best example. And the self-to-prototype matching theory suggests that matching is a strategy of mental comparisons between the self-concept and the typical or representative member of a group to make some sort of judgment. Hanover and Kessels in 2004 suggested that individuals engage in a process of comparing themselves, their own self-image or an idealized self, to in-memory prototypes of themselves, which is the self prototype, others, which is the person prototypes, and others within certain situations, which is the person in situation prototype. So as a part of a larger project that is examining factors influencing musical and scientific identity, the current study that I'm talking about today focused on people's conceptualizations of being musical and of being scientific. So with this particular study, we are asking, how do people think about people who are musicians and or scientists? And before I go further, I'd like to acknowledge my collaborator, Claire Someroy, and also acknowledge a former honors student, Glenn Duncan, who assisted in collecting the data for this project. So what we have is a sample of 564 participants who completed an online questionnaire. And the data for this inquiry comes from two counterbalanced open-ended questions, and these ask participants to provide a free text response to the question being, how do you imagine a musician? And how do you imagine a scientist? We used reflexive thematic analysis to examine people's conceptualizations of musicians and scientists via those free text responses. We adopted a reflexive recursive approach to consider the data. Up to 3 codes were allocated to each free text response provided. Codes were labeled as applying to musicians, scientists, or both. And then what I did was filter that through to remove the duplicate codes. I took then the codes, looked at what was related to cluster and formulate broader themes. And I'll say that I led this analysis and Claire acted as my critical friend to contribute to peer reviewing the themes and sub-themes. So the results of this thematic analysis indicate that we see 6 categories for how people spoke about who a musician is or who a scientist is, or both. So on the screen here is a table that maps a number of the prevailing codes for each of the 6 themes. These are differentiated, as you can see, by whether they apply to a musician, scientist, or both. And I do want to reiterate that this table is not inclusive of all of the codes. However, what I've done is include ones that are particularly notable and or representative. For many, the picture of these people is based on their actions or what they do. Many individual actions were noted, though these can be grouped under sub-theme headings of educating, learning, communicating, exploring or inventing, experimenting or researching, seeking knowledge, questioning, benefiting society, and by spending time doing science or doing music. These actions categories reflects the roles that people have, that they are a performer, or they are a researcher, a composer, or a biologist. Separate, but perhaps still under the umbrella of defining a musician by what they do, are the two themes, sustained interest and internal drive, and being considered a professional. The sustained interest theme speaks to the perception of having an appreciation for their discipline, being motivated and interested and passionate about what they do. Professionalism includes categories speaking to the training and education that they have done, talent, skill, and ability, knowledge, being recognized or appreciated, and being career-driven. The other largest theme in terms of different sub-themes and codes is traits. In other words, musicians and scientists are often defined by their perceived traits. Traits named can be considered both positive and negative, with some reflecting perceived personality traits, as well as a large number of comments directed at people's thinking styles, and for scientists especially, being detailed or empirical. In addition to perceptions about the actions and traits, some people focused on appearance. These comments speak to their hair, the attire that they wear, or even their age. With these, it's very interesting to see continuums that a scientist for some people is disheveled, while for others a scientist is well-dressed. Lastly, a very small number of codes mentioned how either the people are the same or different to others. While both a scientist and musician can be just like anyone else, there were additional comments that separated musicians from other people, that they would, quote, stand out from others, or were, quote, different to the participant themselves. So holistically, we can see differences, but also similarities between people's conceptualizations of, quote, a musician or, quote, a scientist. And while we're not concerned with frequencies, having done this through reflective analysis, thematic analysis, I do want to actually provide you with a few numbers to illustrate the scope of the data. So the initial list was 2,407 codes. And by removing the duplicates, we had 419 unique ideas. 225 of these were about scientists, 156 were about musicians, and 38 pertain to both people. Here in this slide, you can see that the codes that were ascribed to both musicians and scientists. And I'll just give you a moment to sort of scan through that list. What we can see is that there are enduring stereotypes that are evident when code frequencies are considered. So these prevailing stereotypes provide us a prototype for a scientist and for a musician. For a musician, this is someone who plays an instrument and performs. And for a scientist, this is someone who wears a lab coat, works in a lab, and is well educated. I'll note that there are a few other adjectives that, like 113 people use the word creative, and that is for both musicians and scientists. Hardworking had 26, knowledgeable 43, smart 54, and there is a whole lot of other words that, like generic passion, a passion for something being shared with both people. So what this shows in terms of a stereotype or in fact a prototype is that these are defined by practice, somebody's interest in and attitudes towards that practice. We do see that people's professional roles are prioritized, that there is being a performer or biologist or whatever it is, and that there is a passion for and a competence in regularly pursuing and actually carrying out some work in this space. We do see through people's conceptualizations evidence using that 3 areas of science model from Carlone and Johnson, that we see these ideas of competence, performance, and recognition. But we also, in addition, see that these things, conceptualizations, are defined by traits and people's appearances. So it's not only what people do, but how they are perceived to be and what they look like. There's a wide range of perceived traits, not all of them positive, that map onto personality traits and beyond that. So there are clear stereotyped images. We have a scientist in a white lab coat in the lab. We believe that our study extends research into musical identity to more fully explore the role of beliefs and stereotypes. Beyond theoretical implications, our findings have practical implications for how educators and practitioners can create environments that promote nuanced and multidimensional identities. Hanover and Kessels point out that you have to have a match in your stereotype to be likely to enroll in a science class, etc. So here we can see how stereotype matching will have an influence on people's participation in both the discipline of music and science. And we might even stretch out our bow to consider the why-try model. The why-try model is from Corrigan et al. In 2009, and it refers to the relationship between self-stigma and behaviors in pursuit of life goals. This is the why-try effect. The why-try effect proposes that those who internalize the stereotypes directed towards them and accept them as legitimate suffer more significant harm to their self-esteem and to their self-efficacy, which in turn influences goal attainment as well as engagement in evidence-based practices. While this model originally considered self-esteem and self-efficacy as mediators, other psychological constructs have been proposed to buffer self-stigma's impact on goal achievement. So we could come back to this work and look at how we might mediate the effect of these stereotypes or a mismatch between what you want to do and how you see yourself, and this idea of a prototype to get to understanding how we can promote disciplined participation and how we can promote positive identity. It would be great to see future work explicitly consider the self-to-prototype matching theory, and if we turn to our broader program of research from which this comes, we have additional data that pertains to identity and self-concept that we can explore. And another arm of this research we have underway is examining stereotypes via the Draw a Scientist task, which we have amended to include both drawing a scientist and drawing a musician. So I look forward to sharing those findings from additional analyses at a future conference. Cool.